I'm delighted to welcome Jeannie Perales, who's the new executive director of Sonoma Botanical Garden, which is the former quarry hillside. She comes out of at least 25 years. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
25 years of
Get this going.
museum and botanical garden and historical site development. And her forte, obviously, is program development and public and community involvement, which makes her a woman after my own heart. But I think without education, you don't get much involvement and much change. So rather than go on and on about all her interesting work with the Ringling Museum and the Denver Art Museum and her background in management, I'm really excited about hearing what her plans are. I thank all of you for coming 2 days before Thanksgiving. My big worry was how many people would show up. And this is good for 2 days before a holiday. We never quite know. We can go from 95 down to 15 sometimes. But everybody that's here is interested in what you're going to have to say. Okay. Now, you just recently moved from Florida, so this is a whole new territory for you.
Yeah.
And we're happy to welcome you to California.
Thank you.
And particularly the San Francisco Bay Area, which is an interesting place. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeannie. Anything you wanted me to mention that I didn't?
I don't think so.
Okay. Great.
Thank you, Virginia.
Thank you.
Yeah. Well, good evening, everyone. And hi to our Zoom audience as well. Thank you for joining us, and thank you for being here. I echo Virginia's sentiments. It's sometimes hard to get people out of the house right before a holiday, but it's a nice distraction, isn't it, from the next couple days of, I don't know, debauchery in the kitchen and overconsumption. So I want to thank the Milo Baker chapter for inviting me to be here tonight. And especially Virginia, who called me, I think maybe a week into my time at Sonoma Botanical Garden, and we had this really wonderful chat where we realized we have such a similar background and we have so much in common. I think we're going to have to become buddies. I also want to thank Karen for doing the IT support tonight. So that was pretty essential. And I got lost. Virginia told me where not to go, and that's what I put into my GPS coordinates. So I still have Florida plates, so I'm gonna play that card for a while. Okay, well, by a show of hands, how many of you have been to Sonoma Botanical, which was once Quarry Hill? Okay, about 3/4 of the room, I would say, and I'm guessing quite a few on Zoom. And how many of you have been there in recent years since the name change and the expansion? Okay, fewer. So we do have a few new things to share. And of course, I have a little bit of a different perspective on the garden and where it's headed. So I'll get started here. It wouldn't be a presentation without some type of glitch. Yeah, I'm using them. It's not just me.
There we go. That one.
Yeah, okay, great. So that's the title of my talk. But just in a nutshell, we're going to look a little bit at the history and the origin of the garden, the collections, the mission, and where it's headed. So that's me. I've been on the job for just 100 days, actually, as of last week. So you can tell I'm an educator because we count like that. In the beginning of the school year, you have a big 100-day celebration. I've spent my career in art museums and botanical gardens, kind of 50-50. And but I'm an educator, really, like Virginia. And an educator in a place like a garden or a museum is used to working in these kind of informal circumstances and designing programs that are, it's not the same as being an educator in a school setting, a more formal setting. And so, most of the time your students are there on a voluntary basis and, you're not administering degrees, but you're just helping people engage a little deeper with the content. So I'm a mom and a wife. I have two wonderful kids. They're 16 and 18. And yes, I yanked them out of Florida and moved them here in high school. I have four brothers. My immediate family is very, very important to me. My parents are 85 and 87, and I left them in Florida, and I have a lot of guilt surrounding that, but we will visit one another as often as we can. We are a big animal loving kind of tree hugging family. We've got a horse and an old dog, and everybody moved. So it was a big, crazy caravan. I'm a recovering Floridian, as you can see here. And I grew up in Florida. My kids are fourth generation. There's some really, really wonderful things about, especially the coastal communities in Florida. And I'm from a beautiful little town called Sarasota, which is a nice beach town. But it has been very overdeveloped in the last 10 years, which is really unfortunate. So I'm really quite happy to see a lot of the controls that California has in place to avoid that sort of overdevelopment going forward. Okay, so now a little bit about the garden. It's 67 acres in total, and we have three sort of distinct areas. There's the Asian woodland, the California oaks, which was opened up in 2021. We'll get into that a little bit more. It's an oak woodland and oak savanna landscape, and Cabernet vineyards. So, and the picture here is of Jane Davenport Jansen. She was the founder. Jane's favorite wine was Cabernet, so she planted 15 acres of Cabernet, girl after my own heart. We're a nonprofit, and of course it was the former sandstone quarry up until 1906. And there was also a horse barn and a poultry farm on the property, which was once called Three Springs Ranch, and that's where the California Oaks Trail is now. It was founded in 1987. Jane and her husband, Bill, lived in San Francisco, and they bought 40 acres, a home that was already in existence, and wanted their wine country experience. So they put in their pool, and they had their tennis courts, and they planted their Cabernet vineyards. And she even had a little building built so she and her girlfriends could play bridge all night long. So I understand she had quite a lot of fun. And so it wasn't until, it was almost 20 years she had that property until she really planted that garden, the Asian woodland, which is the upland garden. It's the easternmost portion of the property. And you can imagine if you had designed this pretty garden around your house and you had your Cabernet vineyards and all this, but then you had this hilly, sunny, rocky, almost wasteland is what I sort of imagine it might have been like as an old quarry. What would you do with that space? So, so she developed an idea with the help of her gardener. But before we go there, we're going to go to Richard Nixon in China. So I'm hoping that was a slightly unpredictable twist of events here. And so in 1972, Richard Nixon met with Mao Zedong and reopened relations with China. There had been a 22-year period where China and the US did not communicate with one another. Which of course here in California, being on the Pacific Rim, that created a lot of mystery and I think a lot of interest in East Asia in particular, especially China. And Nixon, of course, probably did this for economic reasons more than anything, but reopened conversations with China. And it wasn't until the Carter administration in 1979 that we had a real working relationship. But what happened was that sort of planted the seed, so to speak, for all things China, especially in the western part of this country. And you imagine, there were a lot of people here who had family there and they weren't able to go back and forth. So there was great interest, I would say, in China. And that was political, economical, cultural, and botanical. So it opened up the nursery trade and the horticulture industry to plants of China. And there were some real beauties, right? So you get your rhododendron and your magnolia and lots of really beautiful conifers, roses, the list goes on and on. There were some tremendous plants in China that had kind of been kept out of circulation. So there was this little garden. Well, I'll get to that in a minute. So this garden really is rooted in nature conservation. There's a slight difference between a botanical garden and a public garden. I just want to take a minute to explain that. Botanical gardens tend to have an educational mission and typically have a scientific or a conservation mission as well. When the plants are brought in to the garden, there's data on them. Just like any museum that has a collection, there's information on that collection, where it came from, where it was collected, even sometimes the GIS coordinates, so that if you were to try to grow it in another climate, you would know what conditions it needed, the name of the person or persons who did the collecting, of course, the dates and locations and all that good stuff. So our garden grew out of that foundation of being a collection. So it started off as a collection, which means we have data going back to the early days of everything about our plant collection. 80% of our collection is wild collected genetics, which is very unusual. And it's like a real point of pride in botanical gardens to be able to say that 80% is wild collected genetics, which makes it a valuable resource for scientific, it's called ex situ conservation work, so off site. So Asia, especially at that time, was considered a biodiversity hotspot. It still is, of course, but it was really under threat of development. The Industrial Revolution hit China real hard. And so they were losing huge tracts of land and all kinds of wildlife. And so again, in the 80s and 90s in California, that was of importance to a lot of people, including the folks who were in on the early stages of building Quarry Hill as a garden. Today, our focus has shifted quite a lot more over to rare and endangered plants of the California Floristic Province, which is how the last director ended up expanding our mission and changing the name and everything, which we'll get to in a minute too. Okay, so that being said, those early days, how did this private garden get collecting permits to go to China to collect the seeds of rare and endangered plants? I mean, you couldn't do that today. So Roger Warner, does anybody know who Roger was? Has anyone been to Western Hills Botanical Garden? Okay. So Western Hills was started before Quarry Hill. It was in the 60s, and it was private property. It's in Occidental. I haven't been there yet. I'm going on a field trip in a couple weeks. I'm excited. And Roger worked at the garden. It was a nursery. And he had really developed a love of Asian plants in particular, but decided to break off and start his own nursery and a kind of a garden design business. And in comes Jane Davenport Jansen and hires him. And that's how the Western Hills connection and plants kind of got connected up with Quarry Hill. So I just learned that the other day doing a little bit of research. So Roger built relationships with Kew Gardens and Howick Arboretum, which is in North Cumberland, both English gardens, well established, and they were able to get collecting permits in China. Jane was able to fund the expeditions, and in exchange, we got a cut of the seeds. So that's how that worked. That's how most collection-based institutions start. There's a patron who funds it. There's somebody who's passionate about the subject, and together they're able to build a collection. So that's exactly how Quarry Hill got started. So today's vision for the garden is really to kind of step out into the community and position it as a community resource. A lot of collection space institutions in their early days are very insular and kind of inward focused because they're focused on building their collection. And they might make it available for scientists or artists or others in the field, but not necessarily to the public as a whole. And so, that has really shifted from when it went from Quarry Hill to Sonoma Botanical and even long before that. And so it's really, the goal is to position it to make it, a beloved community resource and attraction for people to come and visit and learn about these plants. So, we really want to attract a diverse audience, local, regional, and international. We get about 14,000 visitors a year to Sonoma Botanical, yet there are 10 million tourists that come through Sonoma County every year. So we know we can attract more people, which will help us be sustainable in a financial sense for the future, which is, very important to us. And we're also trying to create greater accessibility on the site. So again, those of you who have been there know that when it goes straight up, it's an 8 or 9% grade right from the parking lot into the Asian garden. And so that makes it really difficult for a lot of people to enjoy the garden. And so that is how we ended up shifting the kind of visitor orientation and pathing under the leadership of the last director, which I'll get to in a minute. So again, these are just a few pictures of the Asian woodland. These are some really wonderful specimens right now. The colors are incredible. We get some really late reds with the maples. You can see the Acer pentaphyllum on the your far left, which is an endangered plant of China, and we have quite a nice collection of those. And to the right is a camellia blossom. I call it the fried egg flower because they're all over the ground and they look like fried eggs that are just splattered when they fall. So some just really, really beautiful and interesting specimens. Because they're from wild genetics, you would see these plants and you would go, well, it looks like a magnolia, but it's a little different. Or it looks like rhododendron, but it's a little different. I mean, you're all plant people, you get this. But folks who, might not be big gardeners would notice that there's similarities, but there's differences in these plants. They're also not as hardy because they're from wild genetics. They haven't been hybridized to weather, big swings in temperature and wind and drought and that sort of thing. So they're a little bit different. And this is our California oak section. So again, how many people have explored this part since it's opened? Okay, just a couple. April, I know you have. So this is an oak woodland and oak savanna habitat. It's 22 acres. Having just come here from Florida, I have to tell you how much I love these oak trees. Your California oaks are just spectacular. And they do remind me a little bit of the live oaks we have in Florida, which have these beautiful kind of serpentine branches, and they're very sculptural looking. But this garden it was a 22 acre, as I said, poultry barn or poultry farm and horse barn. It was called Three Springs Ranch. There's a very cute little white old cottage from the 1900s that's kind of up on the hill. And some very compacted land where the horse pasture was. And up in the hill, as you start to walk through this trail, you might think, this looks a lot like any place else I could go in Sonoma, the regional parks, Jack London, so many other wonderful spots. And there's a reason for that. It does look like that. I mean, it looks like what you see in the rest of the community. But I really love that the previous director, that was Scott Medberry. I don't know if he came right before COVID. And so he really didn't get to meet very many people in the community. Scott said, let's open this up. This was all back of house. This is where the tractors were kept and things were stored. And there was an administration building. And so this should be enjoyed by the public. It's also a much gentler grade. It's 5%, no more than a 5% grade. So it's much more accessible for the public. And it takes you like a boomerang out and around to get up to the Asian garden, so that again, more people can enjoy that. But it is just a lovely space, and it's got really beautiful views. So I'm very happy to share that we are partnered up with the Habitat Corridor Project. That's April Owens' company and the Sonoma Ecology Center, two awesome organizations and wonderful resources for us. April, I hope you don't mind. I put your conceptual sketches up here. We haven't decided exactly which direction we're headed, but back in 2021, when Scott Medberry changed the name from Quarry Hill to Sonoma Botanical, one of the main reasons to do that was to be able to focus on that California native section. And that was the first step. And then the second steps were, and third and fourth are for me and our team to figure out, which I was very excited about because I think it gives us a lot of opportunity. And so the board approved a little bit of spending for the very end of the year for us to work with April. And I don't know if you know Bob Snyder from the Sonoma Ecology Center. He's kind of new like I am, so you might not know him, but he's a delightful young man, a designer also, and kind of project manager. And what we're doing is taking this welcome center. So that's what you're looking at here. The Welcome Center used to be in the parking lot. You probably remember that. And then it got moved over to where the greenhouse is. So the greenhouse is kind of divided into thirds. It used to be a production greenhouse where they would grow from seed the plants that were collected and then plant them out into the gardens. That whole production part of the operation does not exist any longer because the Asian garden's full. We can't fit anything else in there. But there was also, of course, staffing changes, and sometimes you have people who have that skill, and sometimes you don't. So the greenhouse has been kind of sitting empty, and so a way to activate it was to move the Welcome Center over there into the first third of the greenhouse, and then we use the other 2/3 of the greenhouse for temporary exhibits, which I'm going to get to in just a little bit, but. What we're doing with April and Bob is thinking about this welcome center and trying to kind of soften the edges a little bit, put some California native plants around it, some nice landscaping, and some hardscape elements like trellises and which are not wooden, and other pathing. And basically, they're going to use a California native plant palette that's fire resilient and water wise, and it can become a demonstration garden, so that the thousands of people who come through the garden can see what you can do around a structure. Am I saying that right, April? Okay, feel free to chime in. So we're really excited about that. That is kind of phase one of that change that you'll see in the next few months. And then in subsequent phases, we'll actually do some more preservation and conservation work where hopefully we'll get to do some fire ecology, which needs to happen in that oak savanna. And like so many other places here on the hillsides, you see these golden grasses everywhere that are exotic invasives. That's what we have there too. And so we need to burn, and we need to give the native seed bank a chance to regenerate and repopulate it with native grasses and wildflowers and all the beautiful things we know are there, but just have not been given a chance to grow. So all of that work will be happening in future projects and years, and we're just kind of getting started, aren't we, April? Yeah. So it makes me feel so much better to have people like April and Bob to work with and organizations like theirs, because I don't know anything about California native plants. I'm just going to tell you all that right now. I was involved in the Florida Plant Society, and I love I love the concept of native plants, and I'm into it, but I have so much to learn there. So it's really great to have people who already have done their homework. So speaking of accessibility, has anyone heard of Museums for All? A couple people. This is an attempt by the Institute of Museum and Library Services through the Association of Children's Museums to create greater access to places like museums, zoos, aquaria, and public gardens. And traditionally, these wonderful resources there's a limiting factor for people who don't have means. And so I know, having worked in spaces like this for 25 years, that's always been one of my most difficult kind of realities to face, is that, oftentimes you're creating programs for the elite. And, you really would like to be reaching everyone in a community. So something like this makes it possible. There's a sliding scale. You can do this in different ways. What we've done is we've done a reduced rate admissions, significantly reduced rate admission. And so if you have a EBT card, which is food stamps, you can come in and get in for $3 instead of $12. And children under 12 are always free. So it's a really great way for us to open our doors to more people and be able to share the gardens that way. So that's just another way that we're trying to create greater access to the garden. And what other botanical garden has their own vintage? I mean, I don't know of any of them. So I can't claim anything here except that I was just there for the photo op. But again, under Scott's leadership, the vineyards were not productive and were costing the garden quite a lot, and they're thirsty. And so Scott called La Prenda, Ned Hill. He's a multi-generational farmer, and they decided to give it a shot and see if he could make it productive. So he's been farming the vineyards for 3 years. He's reached certified organic status. They've become productive and profitable for us. He's just released our first vintage. It's pretty nice. I'm gonna read to you the description because I like wine descriptions.
You didn't bring any desserts.
I know, that was kind of mean, wasn't it? I am so sorry. I'll have to bring it to another meeting if you'll have me back. Okay, the 2021 Botanical Gardens Cabernet Sauvignon opens with dense blackberry fruit lifted with elegant cherry and vanilla aromas. Warm and rich by mouth, a ripe middle with firm, well-rounded tannins, finishes with notes of sage, dried rose petals, and cigar box. The La Prenda 2021 Cabernet Sauvignon Sonoma Botanical Gardens is available online and to taste in the La Prenda wine tasting room on the Sonoma Plaza. And if you're a garden member, you get 30% off. Pretty nice discount. So, I feel the vineyard situates us in Sonoma Valley. It really positions us there. And then the oaks, the California oak section, that positions us in the state of California. And the Asian garden puts us on the Pacific Rim. So it's all a little bit geographical to me. But I think we will be able to make more sense of it for the visitor in years to come as we have greater interpretation and programming. So my favorite part is creating opportunities for people to engage with the garden, because I just really feel, as an educator, you don't have guests there, you don't have people to enjoy it. How can you bring it to life? So this, I think, is the best hugging tree. It's on the California Oaks Trail. It's too big for one person to get their arms around, so you have to have a friend or two to help. That's my daughter and two of her teenage girlfriends, and they've been just loving exploring this place. So I'm also extremely lucky in that my husband is a professional photographer and he works for free for me. So he's been taking lots and lots of pictures of people in the gardens. When I was interviewing for this job, I Google imaged it like you do, and I didn't see a single picture of a person in the garden, and I couldn't believe it. I also, there were no public programs on the website. There were no tours or classes or workshops, or I couldn't find anything. And I thought, this place needs me. This is all the stuff I love to do. So, I was brought in to do something called the museum model. It's an operating model that museums and gardens and zoos and aquaria and other places like this, attractions, basically use. And it's where you give people reasons to come back over and over again. So public programs like tours and maybe concerts, things like that. But also exhibitions. And exhibitions are really the cornerstone of the museum model. And so we are launching an art and nature exhibition program in January. And this was our first partnership. In fact, I think even before I moved to Sonoma, I figured that there was a bonsai society, and I thought this would be the perfect partnership for Sonoma Botanical. And as it turns out, many of the plants that they bonsai are California native trees, which I thought was a really cool connection between the California native piece and the Asian garden. But this is George Haas here. He's holding a redwood bonsai right in front of the large bonsai. So we're trying to do a little bit of play there on the miniatures and then the life-size versions. But it'll be a display in our greenhouse. Did anybody here see the citrus show, which was last year? Oh, okay. It was called From East to Zest, and it was about how citrus came from Asia. And it was a beautiful horticultural show that was generated by the gardens. There's different types of exhibitions that you can do at a garden or a museum. You might originate it, curate it yourself from soup to nuts, or you might do a plug and play. And so what we're doing is more of a plug and play style because we really don't have the staff to originate and generate our own exhibitions. So teaming up with Redwood Empire Bonsai Society is, really advantageous for us. And then they love it because their mission is to get bonsai out there and share it and teach people about it. And so they're going to do demonstrations and tours, and they're putting together a beautiful display of 15 bonsai. So anybody in here know where bonsai came from? Well, it is Japanese, but originally, where did it come from? Yes. You get a gold star. Yeah, it was China. Most everything Japanese came from China at some point, and it was called penjing. And then now, when it came to Japan, the Japanese Buddhist monks kind of took it under sort of a religious umbrella, which was not necessarily the case in China. But so we'll have a beautiful display of bonsai. And then we're going to do something totally different. This is called Ribbit the Exhibit, and Ribbit is a collection of about 20 whimsical, playful, human-sized copper frogs, which will be sort of dotted around the garden. There's nothing cerebral or conceptual about this. It's just plain fun, silly frogs. And there's a frog walking a dog, there's a frog mowing the lawn. These guys are playing in a band. And so Ribbit will come and will be on display for 5 months through the spring and the summer. And, we're hoping to attract more people. We want to bring more people to the garden and build our audience and start building a family audience, which, everybody likes Ribbit. Honestly, Ribbit's been traveling to gardens across the country for 20 years, but he's never been to California. So this is his California debut. Okay. And when we don't have exhibits, there's just always something wonderful in season at the garden. I've only now been through 2 seasons, right? So I've been through summer, parts of summer and through fall. And I'm really looking forward to winter. People tell me how beautiful the barks and the branches, and you hear the birds. And so every season, there's something really lovely to see at the garden. And I think especially in the Asian garden, it changes dramatically from season to season. And this, I put a little QR code here in the bottom left, and that's just to sign up for our newsletter. Doesn't cost anything. We have about 5,000 people who are signed up for our newsletter, and we send out a monthly note, and it just kind of has updates and what's happening and when our tours are and that sort of thing. And then of course membership is off on the right, and I did bring some membership brochures and my card, and I hope that you'll join us at some point, and maybe I can work with the team who does tours and we can get a tour on the books, and it'd just be lovely to have you visit the garden. And I just wanted to thank you so much for having me. Thank you. If you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. I'm sure I don't know the answers to California native plants, but
Have your kids forgiven you for dragging them all the way over?
have my kids forgiven me for dragging them all the way over? So my daughter has good days and bad days. You know, she's 16, which she would have good days and bad days at home anyway, right? If we didn't up and leave. But overall, my whole family's adjusted really, really well. She loves it. She's going to Summerfield, Waldorf, which is a wonderful school, wonderful school. It has a biodynamic farm and chickens, and it's got sheep and goats and 2 cows. She's a real nature lover. She has a horse, and her horse is down the street. So she's adjusting pretty well for a 16-year-old, I'd say. My son is actually an aspiring professional soccer player, and he's living in Spain, playing for an academy. It was a really complicated move this summer. And my husband is a photographer, and he's rebuilding his business. So that's probably the heaviest lift on the move. But yeah, no, we're really quite happy to be here. Virginia.
Are there any plans, or do you have a research library?
Do we have plans for a research library? Do we have one? We have one, actually.
Is it publicly accessible?
What a good question. You know, I think that it's accessible by appointment, but I'll find out and I'll email you.
Somebody asked me that.
Yeah.
And are there any plans for an aquarium?
That's a really interesting question. She asked if we have plans for a herbarium. I'm actually honestly kind of surprised we don't have one already, because typically when you go and collect, when you go on collecting expeditions, and I did have the pleasure of going on a number of those when I worked at Selby. I went to Central America, and did a number of them in Florida as well. When you collect the plants, you collect a specimen and you dry it, and you press several of them actually. You dry it and press it, and it's part of your data. And so I have actually asked that question, where is our herbarium? The only thing I can imagine, and I just need to do a little bit more research, is that Kew Gardens might have them, or Howick Arboretum, because they were our collecting partners and they already had herbaria. And it is it's quite something to set one up. You know, it's not an easy process. Simple materials. Oh, yeah.
They may have duplicates. I'm a botanist.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Anyway, it's likely that they collected multiple sets.
yeah.
So if you were to establish an herbarium, you might be able to bring it back in.
Yeah.
But I was gonna ask that question myself.
But I mean, it was one of the first things I thought. We have this beautiful botanical research library, which has books about Asian plants for the most part. So there's some books about California, but not that many. It's mostly Asian plants. And then I thought the same thing, because we actually have a florilegium. Do you know what a florilegium is? It's a botanical illustrations of the collection. And so there was a group of botanical illustrators who, I believe in the 80s, maybe early 90s, came in and illustrated maybe 24 plants from the collection. It's some of the more important ones. And so typically if you would have a library and a florilegium, you would have a herbarium too. So I'm going to find that out. I mean, maybe in my 5th month on the job, I can figure that one out. I know, I have so many questions too. And also the seeds, where are all of the seeds? We do have some, but typically there would be more like a seed bank situation. And do they?
Quite good. How many years? Work is a long thing. God, that's a long time. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sonoma State has got an inactive herbarium.
Okay.
Maybe we would. But she's talking about Eurovision. Oh, I know, but I'm.
Yeah.
You know, as you expand and develop.
I mean, I love herbaria. I think they're really fascinating, and they're just a rich part of the collection, and they're very valuable to the researchers. In Selby, we had a spirit collection too. Have you ever seen one of those? Like where they're suspended, well, you're biased. They're suspended in a mixture of alcohol and distilled water. And they're pretty ghostly looking, the color leaches out of the flower. But, where the herbarium preserves a plant in 2 dimension, the spirit collection preserves it in 3 dimensions. So they're very sculptural. Yeah, they're really interesting. Spirit collection.
Very Victorian.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Oh, yes.
Well, I just had a question about Bill McNamara,
Yeah,
who was the man who went on these botanical expeditions,
yeah.
representing Quarry Hill.
Mhm.
Now, why doesn't he get any credit? He was a friend of mine.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering.
No, it's a fair question. I had the pleasure of meeting Bill actually not too long ago. Yeah. I had plans to put him on the website because I want to have a timeline of the organization. We just haven't gotten there yet. That document is brand new and it just hasn't, I think it's not done. It's a little bit of a work in progress. Yeah.
Include them.
Okay. I still have a lot to learn. Be great.
I'm an idea person and I was just thinking about, an Easter egg hunt
Mhm.
over in the Oak Woodland area.
Be beautiful.
It would be perfect and it might
Mhm.
be a really great way to recruit some new
Yeah.
visitors and members and get kids to know.
Yeah, I love that. She'd mentioned doing like an Easter egg hunt in the Oak Woodland. We have, and that reminds me, another thing about Sonoma Botanical I've learned in the last couple months is that we are in the most restricted zoning of agricultural, and so we don't have a site use permit. And so we can't really do a lot of events. We can do educational programs like tours and that sort of thing. I could probably do something like an Easter egg hunt. But we are going through the process of trying to obtain a site use permit. It's a 2-year process.
Yep.
And so in the interim, we have to apply for a temporary site use permit where we could do 2 events per year, 2 ticketed events per year. So it's a tricky little space that we're in right now. Another thing that's sort of interesting is that we're not a public charity, we're a private foundation. And so when we go to apply for grants, we don't qualify for some grants. So that's a 5-year process through the IRS. So we have,
From a 501c3.
we are a 501c3, but we just have a different designation. We're a private foundation instead of a public charity. It has to do with a percentage of your income being contributed by the public. Yeah, and a percentage of your operating budget, I should say. Yeah.
What's your volunteer?
Oh my goodness, great question. As I understand it, Quarry Hill used to have a robust volunteer program. There were more than 100, I think. And now we're down to 27. So we do need volunteers and we will be doing a recruitment maybe in January or so, January, February. Yeah, we would very much like to get some more volunteers.
How big is your staff?
So how big is the staff? We have 8 full-time people and 4 part-time people. We only have 4 people working the gardens and they're doing garden and facilities. So one thing that we would like to do, because managing a volunteer program it's a heavy lift, and if you don't have the staff, it can be hard to do that. So we're looking at volunteerism rather than volunteers, and we're kind of designing work days. So people can come and do like a one-off, come and work in our rose garden or come help us around the arbor, but there's like a learning component too, or they get to take a tour of the garden or just have free access to it for the day. So we're kind of looking at different ways to bring volunteerism back to the garden.
Something you already know is that the fires, which came right up to the back of that property, have just devastated that area and with COVID. So I'm surprised you're down to 27. It's not disbelieving, but sign me up.
Oh, really? Oh, you mean like you would think we had fewer than 27?
No, I
Oh,
thought that you would have had a lower number just because it was a really important draw for so many
Yeah.
people.
you know, it was such a disrupted time. I think from 2017, the fires, the pandemic, the 2020 fires, the leadership changes. I just think we're just kind of ready to retool and kind of come back out into the world. And we're just maybe a year later to doing that than other organizations are, but it's okay.
You can accomplish so much. It's very impressive, and it's
Oh,
also
thank you.
more modern.
Yeah, we're working on modernizing a little.
Well, it's still a little
Yeah,
not Moroccan in some ways.
yeah. It's conservative. It's funny you say that. I mean, I just came from Florida, so I doesn't, yeah.
How big is your board?
We have 18 people on our board. Yeah, it's a pretty good sized board. And that's something that Scott did very well. He really professionalized the organization in certain ways while he was there because it was COVID. So, you know, there wasn't a lot he could do that was outward facing. So he focused in on cleaning up some of the buildings and you know, restructuring the visitor sequence, you know, the pathing and that kind of thing, and then building the board. And is it a fundraising board? Yeah. They're a board of trustees, not a board of directors. And so by the very nature of that word that indicates fundraising, we're working on it. That's something that every director has to work on, is making sure the board understands their role. And that's not their only role. I mean, a lot of them offer support in other ways, you know, but it is a pretty sophisticated board. I will say that. Like, several of them have been on big boards like the Asian Art Museum in San Francisco or Brooklyn Botanical, or, you know, so it's a good board. Yeah. Yeah, and we could have up to 24, I think. I think that's too big for our organization. I think we're pretty good where we are right now. But yeah.
We were wise in hiring you.
Oh, thank you. I feel very honored to have been chosen. It's quite a responsibility. I take it seriously and I want it to succeed. And I think it's worth it. It's a really neat garden. I mean, it's so different, you know, like I'm so used to great lawns and tulip beds, you know, and like just that very manicured feel. And when I saw it, I went, this is really special with that wild feel. So it feels like you're on an expedition collecting plants, you know, it's kind of just a very special place. Yeah. You know, we have some great longevity in our staff. I don't know if you know this, but you mentioned the fire. The 2017 Tubbs fire, our gardener, who's been there for 37 years, from the very beginning, he turned all the irrigation on in the garden and saved the garden. Yeah. And then the next longest staff member is another gardener who's been there for 26 years and another one for 15. So that says a lot. Yeah. Those guys take great pride in the garden and they have a lot of loyalty to the organization. So yeah.
Okay, what I want to say. A lot of years ago, when we were there, our garden club, and they had golf carts. So that people who could not get up the hill, they would use it. Do you still have those?
We don't have them, they're not public facing anymore, for two reasons. Our insurance told us we couldn't do that anymore, because they were driven by volunteers. So there's this whole liability angle with volunteers and operating machinery and they were categorized as machinery. The other thing is it was pretty hard on the Asian garden to have people driving through those trails with the carts. So it's one of the requests we get more than anything else is bring back the carts. And I want to tell you, going on a golf cart tour in the garden is fun. I like doing it. But we're just really not set up to offer it to everybody, you know? I hope we do have long range site plans that are conceptual. They're not detailed blueprint plans or anything. So they're very much subject to change. But having pathing that is more level and wider so that we could have kind of a loop where we drive people around so that they can get up to the Asian garden and then kind of walk and explore on their own. That's in the plan. It's just not something that I think will be realized right away, you know? Yeah. Yeah.
I just have to say that I'm so excited that you're actually putting in a native garden. I remember going right after when Quarry Hill first opened, and I had just moved to Sonoma County. And I was so depressed because there were all these young Asian plants, and then there were monkey flowers, like straining through the fence line, going, what? I'm very excited. Actually letting them back in again, and highlighting there's a great need for large demonstration gardens, and you couldn't have picked a better person to design yours.
Yeah,
She really is the expert.
yeah, we got very lucky to have April working on it. Can I ask you a question? This is like at the risk of opening up a can of worms, but since you mentioned about that you're happy that we're welcoming native plants in, how important is it that they be hyper regional? Right? We were talking about this the other day at our meeting, right, April? And it was like, does it need to be plants of Sonoma County? Can it be Northern California? Could it be California in general? How important is that to you as a group?
Well, I have opinions
Yeah.
But I sit in the middle of irony anyway, because I have been the manager of our native plant nursery. We have a 2-plant policy here until now. And, but my profession, and I did that after I retired, and professionally, I did grew plants for habitat restoration. So there we were extremely picky about locally collected, obviously. But yet when I'm growing for people's gardens, many times the plants we have the hardest time selling are the ones that we are typically growing from seed. It's a lot of, we grew 25 or 30 oaks for our sale this year. I think we sold 1. And, no coyote bush, very few seed grown coffee berry, but all the cultivars sold because people know the look they're going to get. But yet you have, if you're looking at Sonoma Botanical Garden as a botanical garden, then I think it's really important to, and if you're calling yourself Sonoma Botanical Garden, I would assume when I'm going to that garden, I'm going to see Sonoma County, but natives, and that aren't cultivars. But we have a lot of local natives that have cultivars of them. And I think Cal Florida Nursery has done a great job of doing local collections and creating cultivars, just selections, and given cultivar names of ones who are particularly successful in Sonoma County. So I could see using some of those, but since you're calling it a botanical garden, my philosophy is that should be botanical natural specimens. But there's also, you don't know what you're going to get when you're growing from seed. There's genetic variation and all of that. So that's the advantage of cultivars, you know exactly what you'll get. with the clones.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
It's not like there's not a local spoken less. Me, I'll go after.
I thought we might get some opinions here. I mean, it's okay. It's food for thought.
I would add another angle to what Betty says, and I absolutely respect that, and I think that what you just said is true. But I also think that on the demonstration garden part that's around the Welcome Center, that maybe that could be, if it's a demonstration garden, it's a little bit different, and it could be more what people might want to see around their homes.
Like Hugh has a garden that's
Yeah.
specifically part of the botanical garden, and this is how you do it at home.
Right, and then if you're gonna expand outside of that,
Uh-huh.
then you would be more consistent with the local flora, which would make sense.
That's it.
But
That's,
April and I were.
yeah, that's exactly where we are. We've got this kind of like, let's do both, you know, we kind of have this. Yeah.
I'm not surprised because April and I have been working together for 4 years.
Oh.
Well, in this day and age, they're theme gardens, like butterfly gardens, pollinated gardens, wildlife
But
gardens.
we knew you'd get the insects in there.
Are you the bug guy?
I have
Bug guy.
a master's degree in anthropology from UC Berkeley.
Ah,
I was there for 42 years. So
really?
I've been accused of that. It's accurate.
Oh, I was here to say something. Did you want to say something? I forget, who was our speaker, O'Brien? Or O'Brien.
Tilden.
Tilden.
He's the
Yeah.
original Parks Botanical at
Oh,
Tilden.
yeah. I haven't been there yet. I'm excited to go there.
He was excellent and I really enjoyed him. And so I got all excited about doing more with my native plants. So I went to Cal Floral. I had written a list, not necessarily just from him, but thinking about salvias and what's the other, sages. I had, are they the same? Well, I had the impression that they were native. And then at Calforo, she goes, no. And everyone I had wanted, she goes, they're over here, non-native.
They have, and better, she.
Well,
They have
had,
non-native salvias, most salvias, except for Salvia somamensis. The other salvias are from southern California, so it depends on how you define native back to.
Yeah.
were they
The
call-
California Floristic Province.
Were they calling that not Sonoma County native? Is that?
So they divided in any of the little placards that gives any information on the card, if it has any little iridescent sticker, that indicates that it's not native to California. It might be outside of the state or Mediterranean climate, but not true to the state. But anything that doesn't have that iridescent sticker is native to the state. But then you have to talk to an individual to find, oh, this is the individual that is native to this county, not, directly native to this area, not just within the state, which is of course.
That got very confusing to me. All the ones I had, I'm going, what?
I think that's why the question came up, and it was so great you brought this up, because we were trying to think of ways to be a botanical garden collection
Yeah.
and also help have plants that people can actually have access to, like in local nurseries. And so working our way out from the Welcome Center is kind of where we were landing.
Yeah.
Around the Welcome Center as local as possible, but things you can get. And then as we work out into the meadow and the event center, we're looking at more like locally collected natives. And so we
Yeah.
can represent that, but this space doesn't have the same kind of topography as like Tilden and Santa Barbara, where they have canyons and all that kind of stuff. We have a wetland and we have, just less topography and, I just went to the San Francisco Botanical Garden yesterday.
Did
with the
you?
family. I dragged them to go take a look because it's been a while.
Did you see the new native garden?
It's the same, it's been there for a long time.
Oh,
So
did they just redo it?
They're working on it.
Okay.
Yeah, but it was interesting to see even there, they have a lot more, they have a lot of eco like areas where we have a little bit more limited.
Yeah.
Spaces, so it'll be it's like nice as a master plan right now around the Welcome Center. It's just gonna be an exciting place for people to come and see.
They're real fine, thanks.
Oh, we got another.
I also like the idea of the demonstration garden, maybe being more flexible and more garden looking, and then going with as much type of local in terms of native botanical garden area. But I think you also, at least from what I've seen in botanical gardens, you would also have the flexibility to say this area now, you know, this little part off this side of the path is Greater California, or is Sierra, or is coastal, because you see, I feel like that's something as someone who, a visitor, you might expect to see that, just like you would expect to see, oh, you know, plants of China, okay, plants of Greater California. I think from what you're saying, the front has to do with this, you know, the signage or the information just being really clear. But I guess my opinion is it's a yes and.
Yeah, that's kind of where we landed too. And you know, that's been precedented. I mean, you know, I know when Bill and the others they collected a lot of roses in the wild. And so we do have a really nice wild rose collection, but then we have a cultivated rose garden that's filled with display roses. And so that is something that already exists, you know, at the garden. And it is, you know, something that we could repeat and could make sense. Yeah.
I tend to support Betty's perspective. One of the reasons being, I mean, I appreciate all of it.
Yeah.
And you're a quandary, a big challenge, but.
This is the right group to ask, I'll tell you that.
You want opinions? There's never lack of opinions. But, because our native plants are disappearing so quickly, you know, including trees, the whole thing. And Sonoma County is being developed so quickly. And we don't have a lot of very stringent ordinances to protect biodiversity. I would hope that there would be a strong emphasis on Sonoma County natives. You've got a big cross section from the coast all the way inland.
It's such a biodiverse. It's such a biodiverse county. It's just.
Do a housecape on Kenwood.
Yeah.
Like when you look on there, like it really represents, like that area really represents many of the plants that we use in horticulture. So it's pretty cool to see that. Like I did a little, because as we were developing the first concepts, I was like, well, what does occur here naturally? And a wide variety of plants that we use in horticulture are here in Kenwood. So it's exciting palette. It's not like we're really limited.
Yeah, no, it's a great palette. There's so much to choose from. There is an ongoing debate in.
State of Florida.
No, Florida's pretty lush, you know, I mean, it's a subtropical climate. But as far as the natives go, no, there's actually a pretty active debate going in the botanical garden world right now about if you have plants, there's these thresholds with all the science and data about climate change. And when you look at the worst case scenario and the best case scenario, in 50 years and in 100 years, there's actually a database that UC Davis has used. They put their whole tree collection through this database. And it's saying, you know, these trees are not going to survive in this climate in 50 years. Don't replace your redwoods when they die. And they're dying because the marine layer is like not even really there anymore. So there is this whole debate about do you plant what's native to the area or do you plant what's from Rancho Santa Ana? You know, I mean, what is it going to be like in 50? They say that San Francisco is going to be like LA in 100 years, the climate. So, you know, there's just, yeah, it's a very interesting moment for all of us to make those decisions, especially when you have big canopy trees. So, Thank you. That was fun. I